The silence before extinction is always deceptive. 5.5 million years ago, our ancestors walked a world that was already dying, though they couldn't know it yet. The very ground beneath their feet was shifting, preparing to swallow entire lineages whole. What would you do if the climate itself declared war on your species? If the forests that fed your kind began to wither and die, leaving only dust where abundance once thrived? The late Miocene epoch was ending with a whisper, not a roar, but that whisper carried the weight of annihilation. Across Africa, the great woodlands that had sheltered our early human relatives for millions of years were retreating, replaced by endless grasslands that stretched beyond the horizon like a golden death sentence. The Earth's climate was cooling, ice caps expanding, and with each passing century, the world became more alien to those who had called it home. Our ancestors, the early hominins, found themselves caught between two worlds. Behind them lay the disappearing canopy of their evolutionary cradle. Ahead stretched the merciless savanna, where survival demanded new skills, new bodies, new minds. The Sahelanthropus, the Ororin, the Ardipithecus, these were not just species names in dusty textbooks. They were the last witnesses to paradise, forced to watch it burn in slow motion. But they weren't alone in their struggle. The Miocene-Pliocene boundary marked one of the most brutal transitions in Earth's history, a time when giants walked among the desperate and dying. Imagine standing barely 4 feet tall, watching as creatures the size of modern elephants moved through the changing landscape like living mountains. The Dinotherium, with tusks that curved downward like scythes, stripped bark from the dying trees. Massive hyenas, larger than modern lions, prowled the borderlands between forest and plain, their bone-crushing jaws capable of ending any story in an instant. Do you think our ancestors understood they were living through the death of their world? Or did they simply adapt, day by day, never realizing they were dancing on the edge of evolutionary oblivion? The cooling climate wasn't just changing the scenery, it was rewriting the rules of existence itself. As temperatures dropped and rainfall decreased, the great African forests began to fragment into isolated islands of green, separated by ever-expanding seas of grass. Our early relatives faced a choice that would echo through millions of years: retreat to the shrinking woodland refuges and face eventual extinction, or venture into the open savanna and become something entirely new. The fossil record from this period tells a story written in bone and ash. Layers of sediment reveal a world in constant flux, where volcanic activity painted the sky with fire and toxic gases. The Great Rift Valley was tearing Africa apart, creating a geographic barrier that would separate our ancestors from their relatives forever. To the east, early hominins learned to walk upright across the dangerous grasslands. To the west, their cousins clung to the trees until the trees themselves vanished. But the true horror of this transition wasn't the changing climate or the volcanic upheaval. It was the speed at which everything familiar disappeared. Species that had thrived for millions of years found themselves obsolete within a few 100,000 years. Evolutionary seconds on the geological clock. The evidence lies buried in places like Taurus Manala and the Middle Awash, where paleontologists have uncovered the remains of creatures that seem almost mythical. Gigantopithecus, an ape so massive it dwarfed modern gorillas, roamed the fragmenting forests. Saber-toothed cats with canines like ivory daggers hunted in the grasslands, waiting for the weak and the unlucky. What kept our ancestors alive when so many others perished? Perhaps it was their ability to see death approaching and choose change over comfort. While other species waited for the world to return to what it had always been, early hominins embraced the terrifying possibility of becoming something unprecedented. The most chilling discovery from this era isn't a fossil at all. It's the absence of fossils. Entire lineages simply vanish from the record, leaving behind only empty spaces where vibrant ecosystems once flourished. These gaps in the geological record represent not just individual deaths, but the complete erasure of ways of life that had persisted since the dawn of mammals. As the Miocene gave way to the Pliocene, our ancestors stood at the threshold of a new age. Behind them lay the corpse of the old world. Ahead waited challenges that would forge them into something the Earth had never seen before. They had survived the first great test, but the story of human evolution was only beginning to unfold. The shadows were growing longer, and in those shadows, something unprecedented was learning to walk upright into an uncertain future. If you want to uncover the next forbidden chapter of Earth's history, follow us. The survivors who emerged from the dying Miocene carried scars that would define humanity forever. They had learned the most dangerous lesson of all, that the Earth itself could betray them without warning. But the nightmare they had escaped was nothing compared to what waited in the Pliocene darkness ahead. What happens when evolution itself becomes a weapon? When the very act of survival transforms you into something your ancestors wouldn't recognize? The early Pliocene epoch began around 5 million years ago, with a promise of stability, but promises mean nothing to a planet drunk on change. The climate continued its relentless cooling, and with each passing millennium, the grasslands expanded like a slow-motion explosion, consuming the last refugees of the forest world. Our ancestors, now walking upright across the endless savannas, discovered that survival came with a price written in blood and bone. The Australopithecus afarensis emerged from this crucible as living proof that desperation breeds innovation. Lucy and her kind weren't just early humans. They were evolutionary experiments, chimeric beings caught between two worlds. Their arms still carried the strength needed for climbing, but their legs had been redesigned by necessity into walking machines. They were neither fully ape nor fully human, but something entirely new. Refugees from paradise learning to call hell their home. But they shared this hostile landscape with creatures that made their own struggles seem insignificant. The Pliocene savanna was a theater of giants, where death came in forms too terrible for modern minds to fully comprehend. Picture this. Across the grasslands moved predators that could crush modern lions like insects. Dinophilis, the false saber-tooth, specialized in hunting primates. Its fossilized remains have been found alongside the bones of early hominins, suggesting that our ancestors weren't just struggling against climate and starvation, they were prey. Every sunset brought the possibility that dawn would never come. Do you ever wonder what it felt like to be human when being human meant being hunted? When every rustle in the grass could herald your species' extinction? The volcanic activity that had begun in the late Miocene intensified, turning the African sky into a canvas painted with ash and fire. The fossilized footprints at Laetoli, preserved in volcanic ash, tell a story more haunting than any horror film. 3 individuals, possibly a family, walked across freshly fallen ash while volcanoes erupted around them. Their prints, frozen in time, show no signs of panic or hurry. They were simply walking through their world as it ended, unaware that their final steps would become humanity's most famous archaeological discovery. The cooling climate brought other horrors. As ice sheets expanded in the northern hemisphere, they locked away vast quantities of water, causing sea levels to drop and creating land bridges that allowed new predators to migrate between continents. Africa became a highway for death, as saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and other nightmarish carnivores moved freely across a continent already pushed to its limits. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this period wasn't the external threats. It was what survival was doing to our ancestors' minds and bodies. The constant pressure of avoiding predators while searching for increasingly scarce food sources was rewiring their brains, forcing rapid cognitive evolution. They were becoming smarter, but at a cost. The same intelligence that helped them avoid the teeth of Dinophilus also made them acutely aware of their own mortality. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals something chilling. The first signs of deliberate tool use weren't for building or creating, but for killing and defending. Sharp stones, carefully shaped for cutting and stabbing, appear in the fossil record alongside the bones of our ancestors. They had learned that in a world where everything wanted to eat them, the difference between predator and prey often came down to who struck first. What does it do to a species when survival depends on becoming the very thing that once terrified them? The climate data from ice cores and ocean sediments reveals that the Pliocene was marked by increasing instability. The regular ice age cycles that would define the next several million years were beginning, creating a world of constant environmental stress. Every few 100,000 years, the rules would change completely. Forests would become deserts, lakes would become salt flats, and entire ecosystems would collapse and rebuild themselves in new configurations. Our ancestors lived through at least a dozen of these transitions, each one eliminating species that had seemed perfectly adapted to their environments. The survivors were those who learned not to become too specialized, too comfortable, too dependent on any single way of life. They became evolutionary generalists, capable of eating anything, living anywhere, and adapting to changes that would have destroyed more specialized species. But this adaptability came at a price that echoes through human nature even today. They developed an acute awareness of threat, a paranoia that kept them alive, but also made them the most anxious, fearful species the planet had ever produced. They learned to see danger everywhere because danger was everywhere, and this hypervigilance became encoded in their genes, passed down through millions of years to reach us today. The Pliocene epoch ended with our ancestors standing upright in a world that no longer resembled the one their great-grandparents had known. They had survived the transition from forest to savanna, from prey to predator, from simple ape to something unprecedented. But ahead lay even greater challenges, tests that would push them to the very limits of what life could endure. The ice was coming, and with it, a trial that would determine whether humanity deserved to inherit the earth. If you want to witness the next chapter in this saga of survival and transformation, stay with us as we descend deeper into the forbidden history of our species.